Hello, YouTubers. My last message was titled Bible Translations Part 1. This is an extended message series, and I'm moving into Part 2. But I'll give you a short recap about some of the things we talked about in Part 1. Part 1, I discussed the king's copyright as opposed to a commercial copyright, and the significance of that. Now, it's fascinating that only the King James Bible has a king's copyright, no other. All the modern Bible translations, English Bible translations, some 900, have a commercial copyright. I talk about that in Part 1. Now, if you haven't listened to Part 1, go back and listen to it so you can get the background on what the significance is of that difference. The other thing I talked about is the manuscript evidence for the King James Bible versus the modern Bible translations. They're very different. They come from different manuscript lines. The King James Bible comes from the manuscripts that came out of Antioch. And the book of Acts tells us they were first called Christians in Antioch. Conversely, the modern Bible translations are of the Alexandrian lineage. They can be traced back to the Gnostics in Alexandria. So these are two very different theological and philosophical manuscript groups. We know for a fact that the manuscripts Sinaiticus, those are the Gnostic manuscripts gathered together for the most part in one place, were fraudulent. I talk about that in Part 1. They're faked, and there are very obvious reasons why we know that's true. The Textus Receptus, or the majority texts from which the King James Bible is primarily translated, has no controversy around authenticity. Okay, so I talk about those issues in the first video. So go back and listen to that if you need the background. Many of you already know these issues, I know that. But for those who don't, it might be beneficial. What I want to do today is talk about why all these modern Bible translations. What was behind it? Surely we don't need 900 Bible translations in English. How can that be? Well, without understanding the King James Bible and its power politically, as well as spiritually, it's impossible to know why there are all these modern Bible translations. But it was the King James Bible that took down the Holy Roman Empire. Think about that. The Bible took down an empire that for more than 1,200 years had dominated Europe. It had murdered and pillaged and oppressed and kept people ignorant, forbade them from reading the Bible at point of death. They knew the power of that book. And when King James decided to make the Bible available to the English-speaking people and put a king's copyright on it so it could be freely published and distributed without royalties, he knew exactly what he was doing. And so did the Vatican. And they sent Guy Fawkes and other Jesuits like him to murder King James. It's a well-known fact of history. It's called the Gunpowder Plot. You can look it up. They wanted to kill King James, put the binders on the translation of the King James Bible, and get King James off the throne. They knew how serious the King James Bible was, that it would be a serious threat. The issue was of authority. The Papal States, headed by the Pope of Rome, was the authority. The greatest authority on earth was the Pope, the infallible Pope. When the Protestant Reformation broke loose, guess what? A new authority emerged, and it was the Word of God, and that primary Bible, the authorized 1611 King James Bible, was where people started placing their allegiance. And if the King James Bible contradicted the Pope was wrong. And this took down the Roman Papal Empire. So when we get to the 1800s, there had already been serious efforts on the part of the Vatican and the Jesuits to regain their power and their authority. And one of the ways they did this in the 1800s is through something called the Tractarian Society. The Tractarian Society was headed by a guy named John Newman, who posed as a Protestant Anglican. He was actually a Catholic. And his whole objective was to Romanize the Anglican Church, the English Church. And he distributed tracts all over Britain, making very good arguments for his case. And there were two Anglican scholars that got on board wholeheartedly, and they were Westcott and Hort. Westcott and Hort are responsible for a Greek Bible redaction called the Westcott-Hort redaction. And that redaction is from the minority texts, the corrupt texts that the Vatican approved, the Sinaiticus. And they knew if those texts and that redaction could become the standard in Protestantism, the authority of the King James Bible would be destroyed. And that's what they did. And that Westcott-Hort redaction produced the lineage of the Nestle-Lalande and the UBS Greek texts. They're all fundamentally the same. And all the modern Bible translations today come from that source. The only one standing apart is the King James Bible. And this is the power that the Vatican had to destroy. They knew if Protestants would accept a different authority, an authority that was friendly to Roman Catholicism, that is, the Westcott-Hort lineage of Greek New Testaments, they could reclaim their power. This book, The Jesuits, How They Control America, they were behind all those new translations, and particularly encouraging the Westcott-Hort redaction. And the way they decided they needed to control Protestant societies is to corrupt their Bible, so they wouldn't know what was true and what was not. Now I'm going to turn to page 118, and you can see here this chapter, Battle for the Mind. And in this chapter, I discuss the Westcott-Hort redaction, the Tractarian Society, and John Newman. And I'm going to read you a few things from this chapter to give you some insights into what Westcott and Hort thought about the King James Bible, the Textus Receptus, and that lineage of manuscripts. Let me read a statement that Westcott made regarding John Newman. Now remember, John Newman was trying to Romanize the Anglican Church. And Westcott said this of Newman: "Today I have taken up tracts for the Times and Dr. Newman. Don't tell me that he will do me harm. At least today he has done me good. And had you been here, I should have asked you to read his solemn words to me." Now this was a letter that was written from Westcott to Hort. This is Westcott singing John Newman's praises. Now let us not forget that after Newman accomplished his goals to Romanize the Anglican Church, and he had made the kind of headway that he felt necessary, he went back to Rome, where he was appointed a cardinal, rewarded for his hard work. This is the guy that Westcott jumped into bed with, the Anglican Protestant, so-called, that was in part responsible for the Westcott-Hort redaction. Let's see what else. Here's what Westcott said of the Roman Catholic Church, again singing its praises. "I could not help thinking on the grandeur of the Romish Church, on her zeal, even in error, on her earnestness and self-devotion, which we might, with nobler views and a purer end, strive to imitate." This is the guy who's responsible, foundationally, for all the modern Bible translations. That's your ESV, RSV, NIV, Holman Christian Standard Bible, American Standard Bible, the list goes on. This is the guy recommending that we imitate the Roman Catholic Church. Now his partner in crime, Hort, John Anthony Hort, wrote Westcott a letter, and he said this. This should be very disturbing. Quote, "I have been persuaded for many years that Mary worship and Jesus worship have very much in common in their causes and results." Don't you find that disturbing? And you'll find that on page 122 of my book, The Jesuits, How They Control America. Now, there are many more quotes that you can read. I won't read them all, but if you're so inclined and you want to order the book, then you can read them for yourself. Now, I'll turn briefly to page 194 in my book, The Jesuits, Ordained Unto Condemnation, and give you a little bit of background and some ideas about these various translations. For example, the NIV. The New Testament primarily was translated based on Nestle-Aland, NA 27. Nestle-Aland is part of the Westcott-Hort lineage. It's the same thing, really. Now, the NIV was published by Zondervan, which is part of Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation, along with HarperCollins. Now, if you know anything about Rupert Murdoch and his organizations and the kind of stuff they publish, you should find that very disturbing. On the translation committee of the NIV were two homosexuals, known homosexuals. Dr. Martin Woodstra, chairman of the Old Testament Committee, was a homosexual. And Dr. Virginia Mollenkott, literary critic and stylistic consultant, is an open lesbian. She makes no secret of it. And translation committee members are from a wide range of denominations, including Roman Catholicism. I go through the NIV, the ESV, the HCSB, the NASB, the NIRV, the NLT, and the V. Anyway, you can read about this in one of the last chapters of my book, The Jesuits, How They Control America. So let me just wrap this up by saying all these modern Bibles were for the purpose, and still are, of re-enthroning papal Rome. They've never lost sight of their former days of glory. And the only way to do that was to destroy the King James Bible. Isn't that fascinating? It's diabolical. The King James Bible took down the Vatican. And that's why they went to such effort. And they've succeeded. Most churches use a Catholic Bible to this day. Sad, but true. Thanks for listening.